So I think as Thorsten has indicated, it was about a year ago when the two of us offered some thoughts about the significance of the 2024 election. I'm going to make 5 points, or let me be more precise, make 5 assertions with which I hope people in the room and online will vigorously disagree. So whereas a year ago, I argued that coalitions were a possibility. It was not a very popular idea a year ago, by the way. I want to say emphatically that coalitions are here. We've entered the era of coalitions. If you look at your handouts, this simply gives the most recent polling, that is of the 20th of May, by the most reputable polling agency, which is the Institute for Social Research, which has one standard sample, representative sample of 2,000 people. They poll them every day. They kick 200 people out because they give the wrong answers. That's a joke, by the way. They add 200 people every day in the hope they'll give the right answers. And, you know, polling everywhere is not in any way perfect, but this is, go to News 24, right? You get it every single day. And the trend lines now for the last actually 2 months, and certainly since the emergence of MK as a political party, are pretty much absolutely clear. And that trend line is that in KwaZulu-Natal, MK is going to be the largest party with 33%, and the ANC with 26%, and the IFP and the DA each with about 18%. Guys, this is coalition territory, okay? And in Gauteng, similarly, there is going to be no party that gets 50%. So that's number one. Coalitions are here, and we better be ready for this. Again, let me just remind you, which I tried to say a year ago, you need to think at least twice about what you're going to do next Wednesday. It's who most closely represents your values, your beliefs, your hopes for the future, and how will they behave in a coalition? That's the second issue. So it's not, you know, this is, people are going to choose dance partners. So think about the dance partner as well as the first choice. My second assertion, belief actually, conviction, is that coalitions, like many things in life, are not inherently good or bad. They are on a spectrum of actually, you know, post-war Europe overwhelmingly has lived with coalition governments. West Germany, not once since 1951, has one party got 50%. Holland is the same. So, and actually, there's been remarkable stability and very good economic growth, and generally a progressing society there. So coalitions can be good, coalitions can be bad. If you want a broad thought about which it's going to be, you must ask about the why of coalitions. If the coalitions is simply about power and positions, who gets what seat? And, you know, also in South Africa, by the way, we have close to 100 of our 270 city councils that have one form or another of coalition. And actually, more than half have worked well. So, you know, the idea that coalitions inevitably just descend into chaos is not empirically so. But we know in Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni, and to a lesser extent, at the moment they have a stable coalition, Tshwane, it can descend into chaos. A good coalition is based on shared values, shared hopes, shared plans, shared activities. A good coalition is about what the government does with power, not who has it. My third assertion turns to the second part of the title we agreed with. So what happens on the 30th of May? I mean, the encouraging thing, important thing for people of faith is that the sun will rise. Okay? The sun will rise, whoever wins. What we do is we start a 7th administration. This is the 7th national and provincial government period that we've had since 1994. And so we're starting on a 5-year journey. And now we get into an interesting, and it would be fun here to do a sort of personality test of attitudes towards one's country. And very broadly speaking, you know, to borrow, she's looking fiercely at me, from my wife's industrial psychology fantasies that create different kinds of personalities. I'm going to offer you 2, which is the glass half full and the glass half empty. And, you know, as with all of these dualistic things, both are true. But here's the thing. I deeply believe that if the society and government work well in the next 5 years, we have every possibility of achieving and sustaining a growth rate of between 3 and 4%. And if they don't work well, our growth rate is likely to stop at 1%. Now, it's true that the GDP growth rate doesn't tell you everything about everything, but it tells you quite a lot. And actually, if we look back over the last 30 years to 94, and even earlier than that, we had one 5 golden year period, 2002 to 2007. We grew at just over 4%. Unemployment fell from 37% to 24% in that period. Poverty declined. The country grew. Employment grew. Exports grew. The government's revenues grew. Then, of course, in 2008, we had a global economic meltdown, and that set everybody back for a couple of years. And then when we come back to South Africa, we were well into state capture. Eskom went bananas. The trains didn't work, and we've never recovered back to the 4%. But actually right now, as I speak, there are actually very explicit plans in play and being implemented in energy and transport. Eskom's being broken up into 3 different companies. Transnet is separating harbors and the railway line. They're selling the main container port to a private company to run. So there's progress there. And in the areas of healthcare and crime and water, there are good ideas out there. And if we are able to make progress in those 5 areas, and there are others, I promise you we'll add between 2 and 3% to the growth rate. And I tell you, South Africa at 4% for the next 5 years is a much better country. The glass gets to be 3/4 full. That's the assertion. Okay. Now let's go to my last slide, Wilson. This is an alarming slide. In 1994, we were seized with the Holy Spirit, and people came out to vote. 27 million people. We had no voters' roll. So you can't talk about a voter turnout for 94. It was kind of everybody. I mean, actually, by the way, it was more than everybody. James Motlatsi from the National Union of Mine Workers persuaded first Mandela and then Mangosuthu Buthelezi, who was Minister of Home Affairs, to allow contract miners from Mozambique and Lesotho to vote in the South African election. more than 100,000 of each of them. So you could take 200,000 off the 27.5 million people who voted. Okay. Now, in the last election, 17.5 million people voted. Those are absolute numbers. Okay. And in 94, the population of South Africa was roughly 40 million. And in 1919, the population was roughly 60 million. And so you've seen the decline. The top line is the percentage that we will be told from Centurion Center. That is the percentage of registered voters who voted. The underneath line is the percentage of the adult population, people who are entitled to vote by age, but haven't registered. And the consequence of this, by the way, is that in 1919, less than 50% of adult South Africans who could have voted, voted. And it's a trend, it's not unique to South Africa, but it's a trend of withdrawal from the public square. It's a trend of abdication, of resignation, of frustration, right? Which we need to be aware of. So, you know, my fourth assertion is that this is our 7th election. I want to remind you, we ran 6 elections, including 94, when tensions were so high, and when the supermarkets ran out of baked beans as a symbol of people's fears. They were stocking their cupboards. Okay. So in those 6 elections, the elections were peaceful. They were deemed to be free and fair by everybody. They were not contested in court. But just by way of comparison, in the same period, 94 to now, in the United States of America, 2 of their presidential elections ended up being deeply contested. Gore versus George W. Bush, decided by a 5-4 vote in the United States Supreme Court. You must remember the hanging Chad ballot in Florida. And after all, Trump, you know, A, said the election was rigged, and B, invaded the Congress. So what an achievement. And then also here, for anybody who's interested, a number of us in this room are registered with the IAC to be observers on Wednesday. And we've been doing IAC training. Honestly, this is a meticulously organized election, with just about every possible thing that could happen that has been thought about, and a plan has been made. So we should be very pleased with the quality of our election. We actually should be delighted with the IEC. It's an institution that, from that time, with lots of contestation in the country, and very interesting to see that our Constitutional Court found that Janet Love, one of the new commissioners, there was no question of bias, which had been alleged by the MK party. So it's one of the Chapter 9 institutions that has stood the test of time. We should be proud of it. I can't think of another country that's got a better institution, and we should celebrate it. We also need to be aware of the low level of registration and the low level of voting. The last registration numbers I saw is that in the 18 to 25 area of young people, 14% were registered. So, you know, when we think about the election, and this sort of brings me to my conclusions, because if we to go forward and move into the glass 3/4 full, if we to go forward and expand our democracy, it's going to be work that's done at the base of the society. It's not going to come miraculously from some kind of super leader. So, you know, I hope that people of faith will go to the polls on Wednesday in a Pentecostal spirit. It's just so nice that we've just celebrated the festival. That is, I hope we will go with great joy. I think we will go proclaiming a democracy that includes everybody, that we can use a language, and I'm not talking just about English or isiZulu, that is accessible to everybody, and we can go to the polls dressed up, feeling good about ourselves, celebrating one of the very good aspects of our country. And then, of course, comes the big test, and that is, so what do we do on the 30th of May? Well, we start building, rebuilding, returning to the promise of the promised land. We start building a good society. And you know, the wonderful thing for people from the Abrahamic faiths, particularly Christian and Jews, is that we've got very clear guidance about how to build that society. And so I end with the words of Micah 6:8 from the Message. Lovely words. He's already made it plain how to live, what to do, what God is looking for in men and women. It's quite simple. Do what is fair and just to your neighbor. Be compassionate and loyal in your love. And don't take yourself too seriously. Take God seriously. So thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, suggestions is
Yes.
questions afterwards.
I think, yes,
Yes.
let the two of us speak, and then we can have not just questions, but I hope we can have a conversation, because this is serious stuff. Last month, here at TGIF, Pastor Sibusiso Mdluli reminded us that within a country, either everyone is flourishing or actually no one is flourishing. He challenged us not to vote for any party that pitted one group against another or promised flourishing only for one group, only for our group. Last week at TGIF, Steve Hayes reassured us that yes, a good government can reflect the kingdom of God. The election on Wednesday is only one interaction, one raakpunt between one part of government and one part of the people. Yes, of course, we're voting for government, but government goes beyond Parliament. We may be sure that when there's talk of reducing the public service budget, we're not talking about reducing the number of MPs or their salaries. The kingdom of God in any country requires all levels of government and citizens working together. The worst thing we can do after we voted on Wednesday is sit back and say, well, that's done. It's their problem for the next 5 years. With luck, our work will be just starting. My favorite election slogan, now this does not necessarily mean I will be voting for them, but it is the best poster, comes from the Freedom Front. An invitation to herstel en bou, restore and build. Of course, one of the best scriptural invitations to build and restore is in Isaiah 58, to repair the breaches and make the streets fit to live in. I've been using Isaiah 58 to pray for Gaza, to pray not just for peace, but for peace that will be followed by building. And of course, the best would be everybody building together. And then it struck me I could also use this for South Africa. How nice it would be, I thought, if we could build like this with a new government. And then it struck me that Isaiah is not speaking to governments. Isaiah is addressing people, dispirited people, people in exile, people who feel God has abandoned them. They are being told to build and promised a full life in emptiness, And like my husband, I'm using the Message translation here of verses 10 to 12. I'll give you a full life in the emptiest of places, firm muscles, strong bones. You'll be like a well-watered garden, a gurgling spring that never runs dry. You'll use the old rubble of past lives to build anew. Rebuild the foundations from out of your past. You'll be known as those who can fix anything, restore old ruins, rebuild and renovate, make the community livable again. This building isn't contingent or conditional. It's not something that should only be taken if this or when that. It's something that we, all of us, can embark on right now. There's a saying that you make a road by walking. What roads out there now don't exist because we haven't walked them? What paths are not paved with hope because we haven't provided the paving? In front of each of our feet is a breach that only we can repair. Perhaps a breach that we were born for this, to repair this breach. And of course, Isaiah isn't only talking about the physical rebuilding of Jerusalem. Isaiah is talking about shalom. Lisa Sharon Harper, who I have left behind, but luckily can be retrieved. Lisa Sharon Harper, whose writing I discovered only recently, but Torsten, unlike me, has finished the book and tells me it's a very good book.
Can I interrupt briefly?
Yes, yes.
She spoke at TGIF.
Oh, okay. Okay, how wonderful. I'm really sorry I missed that. Perhaps I didn't know then exactly who she was. In scripture, says Lisa Sharon Harper, the word shalom itself means well-being, wholeness, the perfection of God's creation, abundance, and peace. The peace of self, she says, is dependent on the peace of the other. If we're looking for a plumb line to use for our building, for our rebuilding, the restoring of God's people within God's city, the first half of Isaiah 58 provides this. Again, the Message translation. If you get rid of unfair practices, quit blaming victims, quit gossiping about other people's sins. If you are generous with the hungry and start giving yourselves to the down and out, your lives will begin to glow in the darkness. Your shadowed lives will be bathed in sunlight. Okay, lives glowing in the darkness has a slightly post-nuclear feel, but the rest is pretty contemporary. We can also look for guidance on how we should be living earlier in the Hebrew scriptures. Leviticus, and this people who know more about deep biblical scholarship will understand better than I do, but Leviticus is the middle book of Torah. Leviticus 19 is the middle chapter, and the middle verse, Leviticus 19:18, is, "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people. Love your fellow as yourself. I am God." That New York rabbi, Danya Ruttenberg, tells us is the beating, living, pulsing heart of Torah. That, she writes, is what pumps blood out to the rest of Judaism, the rest of mitzvot, the rest of spirituality, the rest of service to the divine, the rest of our work down here as people, the rest of everything. And I don't think it's just in Judaism that this applies. But when we talk about building a better South Africa, it's really important to acknowledge what we have. Some things have to be built anew, and some just have to be built higher on already existing sound foundations. We know that our brains are Teflon for good news and Velcro for bad news. So we have to make the effort to find and remember and hold onto what works so that the new building is on really good foundations. How do we recognize them? Something, to go back again to Pastor Sbusiso, that enables the flourishing of all. Something respectful and inclusive, something that is the foundation for the beloved community, where each works for the flourishing of all, where the oppressor and the oppressed work together, where Martin Luther King said, the resistance is the road to reconciliation. Reconciliation is the point of resistance. And I want to take an example of this from the briefing that Bobby and I went to from the IEC, because the IEC is a good building block. Bobby and I worked in 1977 in a constituency called Van Brandes. I know it's before most of you were born, but this was an apartheid election. The constituency was Hillbrow, Joubert Park, Inner City, Mayfair. That was the area. And in those days, the law now is much better, but in those days, party workers wore big rosettes identifying them. Now you aren't allowed to do that within the polling area. And a woman came up to me. Names were on ballots in those days, just printed names, 2 or 3, and you made your cross. She came up to me and she said, was your party name on the top? And something made me say yes, although it was at the bottom. She said, and her face lit up, and she said, you see, I can't read. And I didn't want to tell those men inside there that I can't read, because the procedure was, if you were illiterate or blind, you went to the presiding officer, you explained your predicament, they called all the party agents over, you told all of them how you wanted to vote, they all made sure the cross was in the right place, and then they probably put the vote in the ballot box for you. Horrible. But now, with our elections, first of all, from 94, it wasn't just writing, it was symbols. All you need to do is recognize the picture of the person who is the face of the city and make your cross there. It doesn't matter if you're literate, semi-literate, illiterate, you are in charge of. We also have, for blind or partially sighted, something called a universal ballot template. You fit it over the ballot and it has numbers, white on black, which are the best thing for partially sighted people to read, but also Braille numbers. And then a cutout window to make your cross. All the presiding officer has to do is read out the name of the party and the number. You, as the voter, memorize the number where you want to make your cross, and then you go away into the privacy of the voting booth. You make your cross, you take off the template, you fold your ballot, you put it yourself in the voting box. And this sensitivity, this inclusivity, and this respect, for me, symbolizes where we've come, because it's to do with values. And the building blocks for where we want to go here will be things that are infused with a better set of values than we have had up to now. So look for the building blocks. If I can mix metaphors, look for the green shoots of the beloved community. Water them. And if they aren't there, plant them. And then perhaps your lives too will glow in the darkness.
Thank you to both of you. You've also left a lot of time for Q&A. Really appreciate also you guys make a great team. The sort of the different styles. Bobby, give it to us straight, and Gillian, very poetic, and both just just very, I think, rich in content and making us think. Let me be first, just with a brief comment. So we did have the privilege of having. She was in South Africa, having Lisa Sharon Harper. One thing that stayed with me that I've said or used often, and I don't think I'll get the quote exactly right, but she defines shalom as where the image of God is recognized in every human being and valued and nurtured in every human being. I think that's you can see why that stayed with me. So if I can add to the voting guidelines, there you are.
Absolutely.
Shinga.
Okay, just speak up.
Okay. Thank you very much to you both. I found that very illuminating. I was born in '78, so yes, I wasn't there. My question is, when you say after the elections, is the question of, call it the social contract of the society. You mentioned Germany, right?
Yeah.
So East-West come together, solidarity tax, a whole lot of effort from West Germans to help to build up East Germany, and they even rolled back the solidarity tax ahead of time because they equivalated as much as it could, right? So my question, with a very particular Christian challenge in the question, is where's our ethos of what more can I do as a society? I'm not sure that I'm seeing it. I think there's a lot of what can somebody do for me, and I'm just missing the Christianity.
Yeah. Well, let me go first. Gillian will join me. The first thing in life is to speak the truth. That's really important. Our politicians, including our current government, hardly ever make a speech without invoking the social contract. It doesn't exist. There isn't one. Okay. I was involved for 5 years of my life in developing the National Development Plan, which plan was published in 2011. It's quite a long document, not as long as the Zondo Commission, which is over 6,000 pages. I think it's 280 pages. But the National Development Plan starts with a poem from Ankie Cross Proch and Ndebele, Njibule Ndebele. And it's a poem of the country that we want. And I would say, you just look it up on the internet. It's quite a long poem. I think it may even be 11,000 words, but it's the most beautiful vision. That's the young South Africa that dreamed a dream. Sadly, the National Development Plan, although you will find it as a logo on every single piece of paper printed by the South African government since 2011, the NDP logo is there. But that's all. There were 181 actionable ideas. I would sweepingly say more of them have been not implemented than have been implemented. And, it's not really about plans and GDPs. I'm in a way responding to your spirit. It's the social contract is what makes you feel. I mean, we've had it for moments around soccer and around rugby, of all things. So it's incipiently there. Then to come to the question of the Christian role or the faith role, to take it more broadly, in constructing and cherishing a social contract. Here's a thing: in the late 1960s, the Christian Institute set up the study project on Christianity in an apartheid society, SPROCAS. Go into the internet and find their reports. There are detailed reports about an economy that provides justice for all, about the role of the church, about the role of education. They involved hundreds of leading South Africans with fantastic ideas. And, you know, it would be wonderful if we could find the resources nationally to start that new, to say for the next 5 years, how do we want to be a Christian society in a real democracy with a decent social contract? But, you know, we don't need to wait for other people to do this. And so Gillian will talk about what we can do.
Certainly, social contract is just a slogan for politicians, and I'm not sure that they understand it, the people who use it. But at ground level, South Africans do quite well. My favorite image for this is an aloe, because it's pretty tough and it flowers from the bottom up. If you look at an aloe flower, it's the bottom where the buds start opening. Seeing the image of God in other people. My Black friends are very resilient. They have carried on for years trying to teach me to be polite in WhatsApps. I send a WhatsApp without a greeting, and I get a very polite, "Good morning, Gillian, how are you?" And then answering my message. And sometimes I remember, and mostly I don't, but they gently keep on trying to educate me. And it's that level of respectful interaction that is a possible building block. We shouldn't wait for the politicians, but that's one of the wonderful things about South African society. You see other countries in trouble and they are expecting their government to fix it. Well, we don't make that mistake. We don't sit around waiting for the government. We do it. And my challenge to you is go and ask around among your friends, in your church, and you will find small areas where the social contract is indeed operating and where people are indeed recognizing the image of God in one another. And I don't know about you, but sometimes for me, recognizing the image of God in every single congregant in my church, that's the real challenge.
Yes. One question here. I heard on the radio recently that a new party has been formed, people who are 18 or 19 years old, and they are standing as candidates for parliament.
Yeah.
Do you think that this is a movement that can increase and persuade more young people to actually come out, think about the politics and vote?
I mean, for myself, the straightforward answer is I don't know. If you look at the slides, by the way, you will not see, except if you look very carefully on the Western Cape slide, you will not see either Musi Maimani's new party or Singita Zibi's new party. Now, I'm observing, the reason is that this opinion poll operates with a margin of error of 2%. And so, unless in their survey, a party registers 2%, it doesn't appear at all. Okay, so the one reason I tell you this, well, firstly, just where the hell are they? I think both Maimani and Zibi have added to the political discourse in South Africa. I think they are raising values and ideas that are good. And I hope they stick around. You know, in 1959, 13 members of the United Party Parliamentary Caucus, which was a caucus of of about 45 people broke away and formed a new party called the Progressive Party. They had the Cape leader of the United Party. They had the national chairperson of the United Party, and they had 13 members of parliament. They went into the wilderness in 1960. All of them except Helen Suzman lost their seats. So it was the most magnificent failure. I mean, I'm saying this, and I fully intend to say this in person, by the way, to Songizo Zibi. The fact is, Suzman kept her seat from 1960 through to 1990. And you know, the amazing thing is when the Afrikaner nationalists decided they'd made a mistake with apartheid, they used the vocabulary of Helen Suzman to explain to their own constituents about why we had to negotiate, why black people weren't going to go away. White by night was the promise, if you remember.
No, they don't remember.
But what said, you need a domestic worker during the day, but we'll send her home to the homelands at night. So, you know, what the point that I'm making is that starting political parties is enormously difficult, and it takes time. In regard to youth, by the way, also, and I'll set up, you know, we in our own actions need to see young people. I think they are not registering and they are not voting because they believe they've not been seen and they've not been heard. This is, by the way, a worldwide thing. The baby boomers have had it all and they're consuming it all, and young people feel left out. So, you know, I think it's finding a viable, vital, contributing whole place, seeing the image of God in young people is something we have to do in our own churches, in our own communities, in our own companies, in our own workplaces. I think they will eventually find their way into the political system.
Yes, I think also this is just one election, 2024. There's another election in 2029, and we need to be thinking about what will be happening there.
And municipal elections in 2026. So, you know, there's a chance for Mamani and Zibi to do much better in just 2 years' time.
Well, we have a few. What were the hands? So I've seen the two hands right next to me. Kirsten, you want to go?
So, I mean, it's a little bit of a ramble because you said a lot. So I want to come back to the points about coalitions. Firstly, just thank you for reminding us that the glass can be full of it rather than half empty. I just want to come back to the point of I'm still sort of heading towards the 29th.
Yeah.
And this thing of the challenge between voting around values and voting strategically.
Yeah.
So I appreciate what you're saying about rising loyalty and Bossa, because
Yeah.
there's a sense of, you know, the values that they espouse. Is it strategic? Not necessarily. So I'm still a little bit stuck there in terms of how to vote. So sorry, there's a whole kind of comment around that, and I think to Shingai's point, this how, you know, the withdrawal from the public square. How do we engage? And I appreciate what you're saying, Gillian, that it's from the ground up, and that for me is one of the most inspiring things for South Africa. So it's more just a kind of a general comment. And what does our activism look like? And how, you know, the promise of jobs, to me, that's just absolutely fundamental.
Yeah.
I don't know what I can do to create jobs, but you know, that almost that. So again, I appreciate what your reminder, Bobby, of what's been done in terms of transport, in terms of infrastructure, whether it's job opportunities, either MK or, you know, jobs. So there's that whole aspect. And then coming back to coalition, sorry, so I'm just putting it all out there. I think, I mean, I hear you that coalitions have been effective in some places, but we're not seeing it. This struggle for position and power has torn apart the coalitions that have been created. So it's really difficult. How do we hold accountable? And I think Spoo spoke about this, but how do we hold accountable the governments that we do have?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think some of the disillusionment, some of the withdrawal from the public space, because we've seen coalitions not working.
Yeah.
So offer a bit of hope about the coalitions.
Yes.
Sorry, there's a whole lot there. You don't have to
You
respond.
talked about how many are actually working. We only focus on the ones that aren't working.
Yeah. So just over a year ago, there was a national conference organized by the really new deputy president of the ANC and country, Paul Mashatile, on coalitions. And it was a 2-day conference. One of the things that came out of it were some rules, particularly focused on municipal coalitions. The one was that you had to get a minimum of 1% of the vote to get a seat. The second is that you couldn't move motions of no confidence and until people had been in office for 2 years. The third was that there should be a detailed coalition agreement in writing, which could be actionable. Again, on the municipal level, you know, sadly, the dream of 96 municipal legislation was that every council would have a ward committee, which would meet monthly. And so with 50% of the seats in municipalities are wards, you know who your councillor is. They're meant to meet monthly. If they're not happening, we have the power. We could go to court, actually, and we could certainly politically embarrass them to say, where's my ward meeting? At the ward meeting, you could start to do this. Our national and provincial electoral system is deficient in that it has no constituencies. And this has become very apparent with the difficulty. The Constitutional Court said independence must be able to stand. Without constituency, you've got into the enormously complicated third ballot because the only constituency they can have is a province, and that's huge. Okay. There is a panel that's just been appointed to deeply review our electoral processes, and I'm convinced in one way or another we're going to have constituencies. Germany is half proportional representation and half constituencies. That was actually proposed by Van Zyl Slabbert in a commission, I don't know, in the first 5 years of our democracy. Again, if you have an individual that you can hold on to, it makes the principle of accountability so much easier. The big thing is for us not to give up. We have this magical moment where they want our vote and we can shout at them. When we've given them the vote, which is part of a covenant, we've appointed them as the prophets of our dream and our vision. Now we have to hold the prophets accountable. And you know, the Old Testament was good at doing this. They kind of stoned the bad prophets and they celebrated the good ones. So.
Into a lot of trouble. But the point I made about our brain being Teflon for good news and Velcro for bad news, there are more municipal coalitions that are working than that aren't working. But
It's about 3/4 actually.
all of us say, oh, we know coalitions don't work because they don't work at municipal level. And this simply isn't the truth. We had a government of national unity from 1994. We all say, oh, but it stopped working after 2 years. It didn't. De Klerk walked out, but Buthelezi stayed. So we do have a little bit of good experience to go on. And we do understand that a coalition has to work on values. And this is the level at which we need to hold them accountable. I hope they will take a long time, to put the coalitions together. If they announce the results on the 2nd and the coalitions on the 3rd, we might be in trouble. But if you look again at the German government and how long they take to put together a written document, and this is what they've agreed on, and this excludes the ones where they simply cannot find one another. So it is possible. We're a young democracy that's growing. We have the capacity to change. This new law that's just coming to be about coalitions, that it has to be 1%, that you can't pass a vote of no confidence in a mayor until she's been there for 2 years. Well, that would be a great benefit in Johannesburg, where it's a kind of revolving door. And that doesn't do anybody. So there are scattered building blocks, is what I would say, for coalitions. And we shouldn't say, but they don't work, when actually they do.
So this is one last comment, which is this an important. Remember, there are going to be 3 ballots. An intriguing and probably unintended consequences is that you get to make 3 different choices. So your point about strategic versus values, you get to vote twice for members of the National Assembly on 2 different ballots, and the 3rd time for the Provincial Assembly. So it would be quite possible in this election to vote strategically for Party X and on values for Party Y. And I think it enriches the voters' choice and enriches our democracy.
Would you say there's a way to balance out those votes for different people, like strategic, value strategic, like maybe national strategic, like I'm interested in it?
I don't know, that goes into the, I mean, I think I must say, I passionately hope that we can have shared values coalitions. And by the way, there's a very simple test, and the politicians say this all the time and they don't live it, which is just country first, party second, that's all. So, as part of the strategy, it's not only who's going to get the most votes, but it's particularly who's prepared to work with whom. And, I would put the strategy thing, I would say, somebody has to govern tomorrow, and somebody has to play the Helen Suzman role for 13 years of being the voice in the wilderness, telling the truth, and getting ready for a better deal in the future. And so it's almost like vote today, vote tomorrow. It's a clumsy way of putting it. Okay. Yeah.
Finally.
Thank you. I was going to make a point about, or a comment at least about just some of the reasons for optimism. But kind of thought came to my mind as relates to, what happens with the youth feeling left out of the politics and the newer parties. And in my mind, I'm actually excited about the emergence of people like Maimane, at least his latest incarnation, and Songezo.
Yes.
Because if I look at the politics for all people,
Yes.
right, you've got a good spread from left to right.
Yes.
But when it comes to the youth, actually, who emerged was someone who was talking very much to the left, right?
Yes.
Talking to the disaffected youth, shut out of
Yes.
opportunity, and. And so the rise of these 2 characters, for me, I hope galvanizes sort of more middle class upwards youth, and the result of that, I hope, becomes a higher turnout from the youth perspective. Whether or not that translates to them having any power, to your point, maybe they stay the course, for another 2 or 3 rounds. But the point I wanted to make about, the reasons for optimism is, maybe I'll start by saying, I feel slightly sorry for Ramaphosa in a sense, because he's doing all the unglamorous structural work, that doesn't get the headlines.
Yes.
The stuff that's happening with ESCOM, private generation, which breaks up the monopoly, but also the ports, because actually the combination of those 2 is quite scary if they don't work. You can forget about this economy.
Yes.
Right. But actually, it's only the people that come after that that will reap the benefits. We saw that in Begi, building up the coffers, and Zuma raiding the coffers and dispersing villagers, etc., etc. But so I am just hopeful that the coalition that emerges is a coalition that would allow that structural work. And in fact, we've seen the results of it with SARS, already, which is back to its functional levels.
Yes.
I'm hoping the coalition that emerges is a coalition that allows that work to carry on undisrupted, because that's what unlocks the growth for us, at least for the next 2 terms.
Amen.